Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight,
always going to see somebody who's going to try to game the system.
At long last, Illinois awards its first social equity licenses. Is the state ready to live up to its promises on cannabis?
I believe this is actually a historic day.
President Biden touts his enhanced child tax credit program as the IRS starts sending out monthly payments to eligible families.
All these old warehouses are so perfect for studio spaces.
How Ravenswood's industrial corridor has transformed into a hub for artists and beer connoisseurs alike. A new report has the lowdown on Chicago's waste management and ways to address inefficiencies. Jeffrey Bayer uncovers an early Frank Lloyd Wright building that once stood in Bronzeville in an all-new Ask Jeffrey.
Your gelatin is your blank canvas, so create.
And a local gelatin artist, yes, gelatin artist, shows us her jiggly garden of delightful desserts.
And Brandis, as you mentioned, I'm in Ravenswood, where I'll be reporting live tonight as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. This neighborhood was once a manufacturing hub. Now the community's industrial corridor is known as Malt Row. It's home to about a dozen breweries. This neighborhood's also got a rich arts community, and it's welcoming new developments like people spaces and affordable senior living. We'll talk about all of that coming up, but first, back to you.
Brewing up a good story there, Nick. Thanks. See you soon. And now to some of today's top stories. Police investigating crimes will no longer be allowed to lie to a minor during an interrogation. Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the measure into law today, making Illinois the first state to make confessions given by anyone under the age of 18 inadmissible if it's found that the confession was retrieved deceptively. Illinois and Chicago have come to be known as the false confession capitals of the U.S., recording more criminal exonerations than any other state in each of the last 3 years, many on false confessions. By Pritzker's side today were multiple exonerees, including Terrell Swift of the so-called Inglewood Four, who was coerced into confessing to a rape and murder at 17 years old.
This bill, I truly believe, could have saved my life. When it was first brought to me, it touched me in that sense that it could have saved my life. But the reality is I can't get what I got back. So moving forward, I want to try and help and make sure that this doesn't happen again.
And that law takes effect in the beginning of 2022. A federal agency says Congresswoman Robin Kelly can serve as state chair of the Democratic Party, but with restrictions.
Our very act is excluding Congresswoman Kelly from the very activities that she wanted to be more inclusive in. And I think it is very significant that we are excluding the first African-American woman to ever hold this position in Illinois from engaging in those activities.
That was Federal Elections Commissioner James Traynor III, who voted in favor of allowing Congresswoman Kelly to serve as the Illinois Democratic Party chair, provided she excludes herself from state party fundraising activities and that she doesn't take part in selecting the special committee of people who would then carry out those fundraising duties. Some say the ruling makes the position all but ceremonial. Illinois may finally be on the path to fulfilling pledges of equity in the cannabis market, and that could mean more places to purchase pot. Amanda Venike joins us now with more. Amanda, what's changing?
Brandis, you used the word finally, and that is the appropriate word. Marijuana has, after all, been legal for adults in Illinois since January of 2020. But this whole time, the only places that have been legally selling cannabis have been connected to licenses issued years ago when only medical marijuana was legal. Now that is, as you said, on the path to changing, which means if all goes as planned, Illinois will gain 185 more pot shops. Because in a couple of weeks, Illinois will hold a lottery to decide which applicants will be the first to win coveted dispensary licenses under the law that legalized marijuana here. There will be 2 more lotteries later this summer.
As far as I'm concerned, we want to make sure that they go as smoothly as possible. And so we've been working every day since this bill was passed, really, to try to set up the proper lotteries so that we get the results that, we're all expecting.
Illinois was supposed to have awarded its first dispensary licenses under the legalization law last May, but instead it has been stalled. Lawsuits, questions about how the applications were judged, that is, and frustrations that the law did not live up to Pritzker's social equity pledge. Akil Purnell, he is CEO of the Chicago-based cannabis company 11th Level Inc. And he says to him, social equity means giving people harmed by the war on drugs what they need to flourish.
That includes sort of balancing any imbalances and access to resources and things that are the result of something like systemic racism or, inequalities in our economy. And so social equity program is meant to sort of level the playing field, but then also account for, that historical inequity and give people what they need in order to compete fairly in the marketplace.
And to that end, Purnell got some great news today. His team's application did win for a craft growing license.
Super excited. I mean, it's like the culmination of like months, years of hard work at this point. We had a small team, bootstrap, social equity, all that stuff. And so we're really excited.
Now, those craft growing licenses also were supposed to have been awarded a year ago, but he says in the long run, it would have worked out because it would have been a nightmare to try to get business up and running during the pandemic. He says his team did win under social equity criteria. Now, it doesn't actually have the state license yet. There still has to complete paperwork and such. But if all goes as expected, he expects in about 5 months to have a cultivation facility up and running in Rockford, where they'll be growing plants that can be sold as smokable flower, joints, and infused products, like you see with the industrial scale operations Illinois has had thus far. But it'll be smaller than what you see on screen.
That's sort of like craft beer. Do you want you want craft beer or do you want a Bud Light or something like that? And so it's the same thing with cannabis.
More than 200 provisional licenses awarded today. And according to the Pritzker administration, 67% of those craft, transport, and infusing cannabis licenses did go to applicants who of color. Edie Moore is with the Chicago chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And she sees this fix as a success.
I believe that this is a fix, but I don't think the fixes are going to stop. There's always going to be somebody who's going to try to game the system.
But Deborah Dillon says she still doesn't know if her applications for a dispensary license scored high enough that they'll even get to that lottery stage. This even as the lotteries, again, are just starting weeks away. She says what the new law is too little, too late.
It may help a handful of social equity applicants who decide to really try to grow a business, have generational wealth, as opposed to those who are going to get the conditional license or maybe pay for the actual license itself and then sell it. That's my concern, that's going to be too real of a temptation for too many people who have just waited way too long for this to unfold.
She also is suspicious of the lottery process, by the way, that will be held electronically by the state agency that does the lottery for, the real lottery. But she is concerned that will be done in private. And she says she hopes she's wrong, but she fears that politics is still going to play a role.
Well, I think that the majority of people who have participated in this long, drawn-out process, including myself, are going to be pretty disappointed.
Edie Moore, meanwhile, is looking to the future. She says she wants to continue to normalize conversations about cannabis and also supporting those who do win licenses.
The second next step is to try to help these businesses stand themselves up, right? So whatever we can do to help the state, to help the municipalities where they want to locate, whatever we can do to help them get access to capital, access to properties, access to education and staffing, we need to make sure that they are positioned for success.
Now, the law that Pritzker signed today does establish that lottery process, aiming again to elevate those social equity applicants, but it makes other changes too, including those that will benefit medical marijuana patients who thus far had to register and only buy cannabis at one single dispensary. Now they will be able to buy medical marijuana from any medical marijuana pot shop. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. A lot going on there. 8 miles north from the Loop, industrial buildings, Victorian homes, and small businesses line Ravenswood's streets. Once a manufacturing hub, the neighborhood is now known for its breweries and rich arts community. WTTW reporter Nick Blumberg and producer Marissa Nelson spent the day reporting there as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. And Nick joins us now from inside a local craft brewery. Nick.
That's right, Brandis. We're here at Urban Brew Labs. Thanks very much to them for hosting us so that we're not out in a possible rainstorm. Now, for the last 3 years, they've been brewing up everything from IPAs to sours to black lagers. And later this month, they're set to open a tap room. Co-founder James Moriarty says that's a lifelong dream of his. And he says his fellow brewers and neighbors really helped make it happen. Urban Brew Labs sits near the north end of one of Ravenswood's big attractions. It's a 1.5 mile stretch with about 10 breweries and a distillery known as Malt Row.
Especially in the summer, instead of people bar hopping, we get people brewery hopping. And, and because the Chamber's done a great job of promoting the area, it's become an attraction. So we feed off of everyone else's success and, and now with the tap room, hope to be able to contribute a little more to the neighborhood.
Now, Ravenswood's also known for its thriving art scene, including Chicago Glass Collective, which founder Leslie Spiker opened in 2012. It offers a variety of classes, which are starting back up next week, and it's a workspace for artists like Chitra Punjabi, who's been a member for 2 years. She got interested in glass art on a trip to Venice as a teen, and she says if it seems intimidating to you, the collective is really a great place to get started.
I feel like we're a space where we can meet people where they're at, and there's always something for everyone. And there's such a community here at the collective, which is one of the things I love about being a member and part of this space. The members here are always sharing ideas with each other. We just have really great community here, and I think that's the biggest selling point, on top of being able to do some really creative, cool stuff.
Now, just down the road from the Glass Collective is Bosley's Backyard, a private indoor dog play space rentable by the half hour. It's named after owner Kim Theobald's pup. Bosley's is meant for dogs who don't do so well at the dog park, or for a couple of canine pals to get together, or for training. And it's designed for both physical and cognitive stimulus.
I think it's just really important to try different things with your dog and introduce them to new environments, showing them different activities, and like when they get it and you're doing a positive reinforcement and you reward them for it, it just really builds their confidence and gives them self-control, and it's really important for you to work on that communication with you and your dog.
Now, Bosley's is a new business. After some pop-ups last year, its permanent home in Ravenswood opened up in May. It's one of many small businesses, both new and old, in the area that are excited to welcome back customers, but they're also very aware that while the pandemic has eased, it has not ended.
Costs for their supplies are double and triple what they were a year and a half ago. They're running at half staff and paying those folks that are there overtime. So it's an exciting time, but still a bit of a hectic one. And so we're really excited at the grace that residents have shown our businesses.
Now, the Chamber's also been involved in an effort to rethink some of Ravenswood's public spaces, carving out so-called people spaces with everything from outdoor seating to artwork to spots for concerts. While it's a neighborhood that's easy to get around, Wagendorf says it doesn't have large gathering spaces like neighboring Lincoln Square or North Center.
When you look at our geography, there's not a good location for one. So after about 5 years of beating our head against the wall with this problem, we decided to create a bunch of small people spaces that are all going to have some architectural and artistic elements that connect them, but they'll all be different and kind of fit their specific corridors.
Now, in addition to reusing public space, this neighborhood's also seeing the redevelopment of the long vacant building that formerly housed Ravenswood Hospital. In partnership with the Chicago Housing Authority, it's been turned into affordable housing for seniors, independent living for folks 55 and up, with the option to move into assisted living as residents age and their needs change.
For the low-income population in Chicago, the options really are, as you get to be too old and frail to be in your own apartment, you're really looking at going into a nursing home. And this facility provides a better option. It allows people to move kind of seamlessly within the same facility from being in their own apartment to being still in their own apartment, but in their own apartment with a higher level of care.
Now, Chicago Housing Authority CEO Tracy Scott says this combination of services is the first project of its kind in the state and could be a model for future efforts. Scott also says a vacant building getting new life is good for the fabric of the neighborhood.
That's the only way that you can have decent, safe, and affordable housing is truly to have strong communities. So we have to be concerned with not only the housing itself, but what's in the community, the green space, services, healthcare, food. All of those, and I shouldn't forget, because we're talking about senior living, but schools are critical for strong communities.
Now, coming up, we'll hear from one of Ravenswood's aldermen with a bit more on that new senior housing, as well as public space, the police contract, and the upcoming ward remat process. But for now, Brandis, back to you.
All right, Nick, thanks. We'll see you in just a bit. And up next, what you need to know about the child tax credit payments. Stay with us.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/Daily Briefing and sign up.
Starting today, millions of families across America, including some 1.3 million in Illinois, will begin to receive monthly payments from the IRS as part of President Joe Biden's revamped child tax credit program. The monthly payments between $250 and $300 per child for eligible families will last through the end of the year, although Biden hopes to make the payments permanent. Here's a little of what he said about the program today.
This would be the largest ever one-year decrease in child poverty in the history of the United States of America. It's one of the largest ever single tax cuts for families with children. And it's a reflection of our belief that the people of this country who need a tax cut aren't the folks at the top.
Now, joining us with more are Megan Dugan Bassett, who is one of the founders of the Get My Payment Illinois Coalition, formed to help people get their stimulus checks. She is also a fellow at the New America think tank based at the Chicago Community Trust. And Harish Patel, Director of Economic Security for Illinois, a nonprofit, nonpartisan group that advocates for policies to benefit working people. Now, let's go over what the expanded child tax credit includes. It's $250 for each child ages 6 to 17, $300 for each child under the age of 6. And those payments will be given to single parents earning up to $75,000 or single parents considered the heads of their household earning up to just over $112,000, and couples earning up to $150,000. Harish, let's start with you, please. Is there an argument that these payments should be more targeted toward those on the lower scale of income?
First of all, thank you for having us, and it is a good day. Had a lot of people, a lot of families who have been struggling through the pandemic are going to get a check or a direct deposit in their account, and it's worthy of celebration. And I'm really glad that you all are taking time to talk about this. I absolutely think that cutting child poverty in half, as the President talked about at the top, is really important. But we also know that there's a lot of other families that are going to use this money for childcare and savings for college, what one may say middle-class families. So both families who make no income, are low income or close to a zero income, all the way up to middle-class families, all have needs. The cost of living and cost of raising children have gone up. And what the government is saying is it's really hard work to parents, to raise kids. And here's a little bit of support. So covering 90% of families in Illinois who would be getting it is absolutely the way. I don't think that any shorter target would help. And also, it's really important that in the pandemic, we create the cushion that families need to not only for savings, but to spend that money.
And
because
Harish,
giving them money to spend is probably going to benefit our small businesses.
Now, as you mentioned, this is going to have expected to have a huge impact on child poverty, at least temporarily, from what we know so far, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But how many families and children in Illinois are going to benefit from this?
We know that about 2.5 million children in Illinois will be directly benefiting in some way, shape, or form in some families in Illinois. And it's going to impact 46% of those are going to be lifted out of poverty.
Megan, let's talk about how you get it. Do people automatically qualify? Do they have to sign up for it?
Great question, and thanks for having me also. So for people who have already done taxes in the past, so 2019, 2020 taxes, or people who use the non-filer tool that the IRS put out last year to help people get their stimulus checks, they should get it automatically. We have heard that some people getting Social Security or SSI may not get it automatically. For people who aren't in that group that are going to get it automatically, people should. There's two things people can do. So one, if people have earned income, they think that they're eligible, they have maybe a higher income, and they can wait. They may want to file taxes. That would put them in line. For people who really need that advanced monthly payment, they're maybe in a bad position. Also, people who are non-filers, so they're people who earn so little they don't have to file. There is a tool that the IRS has created called the non-filer tool that will help people claim that, and they can go on the IRS website and basically sign up for the advance payment.
Now, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, she promoted this program today, warning of scammers. Here she is.
Beware of scams. The Internal Revenue Service, IRS, you are not going to get a call from the government. If you get a call and people say, oh, but we have to have some of your personal information, hang up. Do not give that information.
Megan, how wary of scammers should people be?
I think people should be very wary. There's always scammers that, jump up with any new form of money. And we've seen more and more scams created as the stimulus checks came out. And so people do need to be very careful. If they get someone coming to them saying, we can help you on behalf of the IRS. That's one thing the IRS has been warning about is you don't need anyone to do it on your behalf. You can do it yourself. And that's what we really try to give people the tools to do at getmypaymentillinois.org, as well as on the childtaxcredit.gov is a government website that has a lot of really great resources for people.
Now, we know that immigrant families won't be able to get the tax credit if their child does not have a Social Security number. Harish, is there any pushback against that to ensure that those families are also able to benefit?
Yeah, I think it's important to share with people that if you're a mixed status family, so let's say you're an undocumented family, but you have an ITIN number, an individual tax identification number, and your child has a Social Security number, then you do qualify, and you should absolutely make sure that you fill out your ITIN file and or go on the website, the Child Care Credit website, to apply and get it. Now, for folks, we do think that for folks who are undocumented but do not have ITIN number or children with a Social Security number, absolutely should qualify. And we know that there is a pushback from some legislators that think that any child in America should absolutely be getting this, because we know that not only that this will benefit them, but many of the public health reasons to get folks the cash so they can go, let's say if you're a 14-year-old and your mom needs that extra cash to get you to that appointment to get you that vaccine, that's exactly what we would want as a public health response. And we think that child tax credit should be expanded to all families, regardless of their immigration status.
Now, we know that, at this moment, this is a temporary measure through the end of the year, but President Biden would like to see it extended as part of his American Families Plan. Megan, how tough is that fight going to be? Is there, bipartisanship on this issue?
I feel like this is a really great question for Harish. I'm going to add one thing before I turn it over to him. But I think, one of the challenges that President Biden faces is that historically tax credits have been really appealing to both Republicans and Democrats because Republicans have seen it as an incentive to work. So that's what we consider one of the benefits of this bill is that for people who are really struggling and don't have income, they can still get this credit. But that is, a concern for some Republicans. I think that view misses, that there are tons and tons of benefits, long-term benefits for children that will feed back into our economy. So they do better in school, they're more likely to make more wages in the future when they get these tax credits. So I think that's maybe a short-sighted way of looking at it. And I think it's conjecture right now. We don't know for sure. We also know that a lot of these tax credits are work incentives for multiple reasons. But I'm sure Harish has some great things to add to that.
I would love to hear what Harish has to say, but we're actually out of time, so I'm going to have to leave it there. But thank you so much to Megan Dugan-Bassett and Harish Patel for joining us. And up next, what is gelatin art? We show you some vibrant examples right after this. Is there anything that these police departments can do to earn trust from the community at this point? What inspired you to propose this bill?
We need some legislation. We've got to turn the page on this history.
What are the ways in which we can hold institutions accountable while also providing an opportunity for community to show up and not only just demand, but ask that we build these bridges together, because I think that that's the only way that we're truly going to get free.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including findings from a new study on waste management in Chicago. But first, all across the city, gardens are exploding with brilliant color right now as summer enters full bloom. And though summertime is fleeting here in Chicago, a Southside gelatin artist, you heard that right, captures that floral fantasy year-round with a sweet twist. Chicago Tonight's Erica Gunderson has the story.
There's no limit to what you can do with gelatin. Actually, like the clear gelatin is your blank canvas.
The gelatin dessert. For some, gelatin is a jiggly retro novelty, the province of church potlucks and school lunches. But in Mexican culture, gelatins like the astonishingly realistic blossoms Angelica Aguilar makes in her Englewood kitchen are not just a sweet treat, but an art form.
The koi fish, birds, flowers, butterflies, bees, anything that comes to your mind you can put in the gelatin.
Aguilar was born in Mexico, but she didn't develop an interest in making gelatin art until she was a young adult in Chicago.
I started back in spring of 2008 when my dad was a general contractor back then. He was doing a rehab in the back of the yards area here in Chicago, and there were some vendors walking by selling these gelatins. And my dad brought some home, and when he showed them to me, I was totally mind blown.
The gelatin flower fascinated Aguilar, but she says the vendors weren't willing to teach her how to make them. So she started poking around for ways to teach herself.
I would see pictures of gelatins, but there wasn't any reference on the recipes or the tools that you're able to use. So knowing just the basic recipe of gelatin, I did my work by experimenting and just poking the gelatin and seeing what was the reaction.
Aguilar finds inspiration for her gelatin garden right outside her back door.
I always love to walk around my garden and stare at the flowers. I focus on the shape, the folds, the little details that each petal has on each flower.
In order to faithfully render each flower's unique frills and ruffles in gelatin, Aguilar has handcrafted stainless steel tools she calls gubbia needles.
The word gubbia is an Italian word for chisel, and it kind of works like a chisel by molding the cut inside the gelatin. And these are attached to a lowered lock syringe.
Today, Aguilar makes custom gelatins for events, like weddings, cotillions, and baby showers. She also teaches gelatin art classes.
Rinse it out.
She even gave me a mini lesson in her kitchen.
It's all about the movement that you do with the needle.
What I like about this best is that you can cover up all of the ugliness on the underside of it. Just flip it over, it's fine.
Yeah, no one will ever know.
The results of my first foray into gelatin art might have been a little wobbly.
You know, my first attempts at things have been worse before.
I got a competition.
Yeah.
But I did find the process very calming.
A lot of people find it therapeutic and they relax just by poking the gelatin, and they make, wonders with them. They come here not knowing how to draw, and they actually can create something, surrealistic with it.
After all, what's better than art you can eat?
We all have problems in life, and you cannot change that. But by making flowers, you are able to have control, and you end up with something beautiful and delicious to eat.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
Excellent attempt, Erica. And you can see more of Angelica Aguilar's Gelatin website, Gelatin art, on our website. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, one of Ravenswood's older people on new developments in the neighborhood and the outlook for redistricting in Chicago. Ideas for how city residents can more responsibly dispose of their garbage and recycle old items. And Jeffrey Baer on an almost forgotten Frank Lloyd Wright building influenced by the architect's mentor, Louis Sullivan. But first, some more of today's top stories. Cook County public health officials are shifting their focus in getting more vaccines into the arms of residents. They announced today that the county's mass vaccination sites in Forest Park, Des Plaines, and Madison will close next week. Instead, the public health department will focus on bringing vaccines to people where they live and work, as well as festivals, community events, and schools. Officials say at their peak, they were administering up to 4,000 doses per day at those mass vaccination sites, but they're now seeing less than 100 to 150 per day. Disgraced R&B singer R. Kelly will be allowed to shake up his legal defense team just weeks before he's set to go on trial in New York for racketeering charges. His top two attorneys, Steve Greenberg and Michael Leonard, both from Chicago, asked to withdraw from the case, citing a falling out among Kelly's team of attorneys and saying it would be impossible for them to continue representing Kelly. His sex trafficking trial is set to begin in early August in Brooklyn federal court. He is still facing sex-related charges here in Illinois and Minnesota, though he's denied ever abusing anyone. And the Chicago Auto Show is finally revving up after being shut down for almost a year and a half. The 5-day show opened to the public today inside McCormick Place's West building and outdoors along Indiana Avenue. Since the show is typically hosted in February, this is the first time it's been held in the summer. The outdoor space makes room for new test track experiences, more cars to test drive, and even electric vehicle demonstrations. Visitors can also pull up to the Street Fest, which includes food trucks, local brews, and live music. The last day to drive up is Monday the 19th. And now we check back in with Nick Blumberg, who spent the day reporting in Ravenswood as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Nick.
Well, Brandis, earlier today I spoke with 47th Ward Alderman Matt Martin, who represents much of this area, and I began by asking him about the impact of that senior housing development we told you about earlier in the program.
This is 100% senior affordable site that we're going to have just a block away from where we're standing. We're super excited. They're going to be opening fully in the coming months. We've been working with them to make sure that we're doing drives for things like board games. So even the small things that'll mean a difference in terms of the culture that gets created, that it's turnkey ready for folks. It's going to be hugely significant. Lastly, it's 100% adaptable reuse of an existing building. So very environmentally sustainable, as well as being that affordability that our community needs, particularly for our seniors.
So here in Ravenswood and in your ward in general, there have been some lasting changes kind of sparked by COVID in terms of how we use public space, things like shared streets or people spaces. Do you think this is the kind of lasting change that we might see in some of our public spaces around the city?
We know that we need to rethink how infrastructure works for folks, and part of what COVID has shown us is that there are terrific opportunities in neighborhoods like Ravenswood to eat, work, and play here. And so when I think about working with the Greater Ravenswood Chamber of Commerce on people spaces, these dynamic intersections where we know a lot of folks are congregating, we have fantastic businesses, being able to expand those so folks can walk through those people spaces, sit at them, I think it's one of a number of things that we're working to do from an infrastructure standpoint to make sure our area remains open and welcoming.
So right next to Ravenswood, also in your ward, there's been a little bit of frustration around the so-called ghost kitchen that offers space for restaurateurs who don't have a location of their own. You know, some questions around traffic and concerns that this is sort of an Uber-like, disruptive business, especially because there's a founder of Uber involved. Where do things stand with that issue?
So things are still improving, but we know that problems remain. And what we knew from the outset was this is an issue that adjacent businesses had flagged for us, saying the way that this particular kitchen moved in created a lot of problems, a lot of issues with their own business models. So it's really important that, one, we continue to find ways to accommodate the businesses and residents involved there, while also ensuring proactively that we're being thoughtful around where new kitchens are going, so that if we do have new kitchens popping up in other parts of the ward and the city, that there be the environmental and infrastructure needs in place to be able to accommodate those businesses.
There's been some back and forth in the last week or so with Mayor Lightfoot and the Fraternal Order Police on the long-awaited police contract. What do you think we can expect from that? Do you think we'll see some, an agreement soon? And do you think there will be some reform elements in that contract?
I am as interested as everyone in seeing where this ends up. At the end of the day, arbitration seems likely. That's where we've gone in the past when it comes to the FOP contract. At the end of the day, we need the accountability changes to that contract that were highlighted by the federal DOJ after the Laquan McDonald murder video came out, as well as things in the federal consent decree that I and others helped bring about. Those are the sort of changes to the FOP contract that I'm going to be most interested to see, and that's what I continue to hear from residents about.
So later this month, the once-a-decade ward remap process is getting started. It will be a closed-door process rather than sort of an independent commission or something like that, as some reform-minded folks had called for. This is your first remap process. What do you expect to see out of that?
So as you mentioned, it's my first go-around, so I'm learning, like a lot of my freshman colleagues, about how this is going to work. At the end of the day, we need to see the data come in from the federal government, the census, to understand where there was population gain, where there was decline. I expect in and around the ward to have seen some increase, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're talking with residents, I'm talking with colleagues to make sure that the map is something that reflects our needs and values.
Now, coming up, we'll learn about a long-running manufacturing job training program. But for now, Brandis, back to you in the studio.
All right, Nick, thanks. We'll see you in a little bit. The city of Chicago produces more than 4 million tons of material waste every year. That's about 3 pounds of trash per Chicagoan, according to the Delta Institute. That's a nonprofit that conducted a recent waste management report on the city. The report highlights inefficiencies in how Chicago sorts and disposes residential, commercial, institutional, and construction waste while laying out short and long-term solutions. Joining us to discuss these findings are Bill Schleiser, CEO of Delta Institute, a nonprofit that seeks environmental solutions for Midwest communities, and Angela Tovar, the City of Chicago's Chief Sustainability Officer. Thanks to you both for joining us. So, Angela Tovar, let's start with you, please. More than 4 million tons of waste produced in Chicago every year. That's a lot. What does that number include, and is it especially high for a city like ours?
Yes, thank you so much, Brandis, for having us on. Yes, I mean, that number includes residential waste from single-family homes. That number includes high-rise residential waste. That number includes waste that's generated from our industrial, commercial, and institutional buildings here in Chicago. So it reflects, different types of buildings and different operations and sectors throughout the city. That number is high, but Chicago is a big city. I think that, what is notable about the waste study is that our recycling diversion rate has hovered around the same that it has been for quite some time, around the 8 to 10%. And we have a really wonderful opportunity here to drive innovation and to drive new solutions to bring up that recycling rate and really focus on waste diversion from landfilling.
And Bill, what are some of the inefficiencies that you all found in Chicago's waste management system, and what are some possible solutions?
So we wanted to look comprehensively across all the materials that get generated in the city of Chicago. And so we actually don't think about it as inefficiency, as more of opportunities to improve environmental impact, create economic opportunities, and deal with environmental justice issues. And we have, through the reports, really selected and sliced and diced that entire system to look at a whole range of things that the city can do, from those different types of materials, from the places that they're generated, from logistics and data management and tracking, transparency and communications, and education. It's really a comprehensive list of things that we can start on now and plan for larger scale infrastructure investment in the future.
Angela, what are some of the mistakes that Chicagoans make when it comes to disposing of or recycling certain materials?
Yeah, I think that the issue is typically contamination, right? Or wish cycling is another issue as well. With contamination, we really have to make sure that our recyclables are rinsed before we put them in the blue cart. If you're recycling something like a pizza box, for example, if the top is soiled, you have to break that piece off and then recycle the part that hasn't been soiled. And so just issues like that. And that's on us to create more opportunities to educate people about the right way to recycle. Also, some people, wish that some of the items that they have, plastic bags, for example, should go in the blue bin, but they don't, right? And so we have to just be better about ensuring that people know where those items go. In that case, for example, the plastic bag, that would go to your local grocery store that has those recycling bins when you walk in to handle those plastic bags. So just giving more information to people, making sure information about recycling is out there for communities to understand how they can be doing it better. And then, there are a number of recommendations that look beyond just single residential homes, right? There are a number of other sectors where we can look at restaurants, industrial sectors, the building sector in particular, a lot of materials that can be reused and recycled. So it's also about broadening our approach to recycling as well.
And Bill, what should consumers know? What should we consider when purchasing new products?
Yeah, so really look at the products and what they're made of and what's in them. One of my pet peeves is opening up a package in a package, and we're looking at opportunities for how thinking about the waste system. How do we get just to stop putting that stuff in a receptacle so that we don't even have it going there? And if we end up putting it in a receptacle, we have opportunities to take it out of the waste flow for reuse, reclamation, and economic opportunities that can be utilized in the city to create job creation. So it really is about being more aware. And now we're looking at, one of the recommendations is to look at basically providing fees that would help us deal with those materials that are being produced by manufacturers.
And Angela, what is the environmental impact of waste management? There's an acceleration of climate change there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Waste, so if you think about waste, the processing, the landfilling, and the emissions that come out of landfilling, and also just the transportation that it requires, right? A city like Chicago, we export our waste, and most major cities at this point do, because landfilling is typically banned in major cities. And so just the amount of transportation it takes to handle our waste, all of those are sources of emissions, and collectively that accounts for 6% of our greenhouse gas emissions here in the city of Chicago. So there's a tremendous impact here. And also, I think one of the notable things about the study was looking at the impacts of waste infrastructure on our environmentally overburdened communities. And so there are a number of recommendations about how we can alleviate that burden and how we can continue to improve our waste system and our transportation system to align ourselves with climate change.
Thank you. Before we run out of time, I wanted to bring Bill in. We've got about 45 seconds. When it comes to environmental justice and public health, how are different parts of the city differently impacted by waste management?
It follows the same environmental justice patterns that we see with air quality and legacy pollution issues. The south and west sides are disproportionately burdened both with waste infrastructure and the impacts from that, and the traffic and logistics. And that's one of the things that we really wanted to map out and make clear, is that this is an opportunity for the city not only to rethink waste management, but also that the environmental justice impacts of that, and actually create economic opportunities that then can reinvest into those communities as well.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Angela Tovar and Bill Schleiser. Bill, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly.
You got it. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Have a good night.
You too. Take care.
And up next, filling and maintaining jobs in the manufacturing sector. But first, a look at the weather.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
And now we check back in with Nick Blumberg, who spent the day reporting in Ravenswood as a part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Nick.
Brandis, we're joined now by Reagan Brewer-Johnson. She's president of the Jane Addams Resource Corporation, a manufacturing job training organization based here in Ravenswood. Thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Good to be here.
So for folks who aren't familiar with the work that you do, can you give us a little thumbnail of that and the folks that you work with?
Certainly. So we provide free job training for anyone that's interested in getting into a career in manufacturing. We focus on jobs that we consider to be middle skilled positions. Those are jobs that don't require a four-year degree, but they do require some training in addition to high school, some training or certification. Those occupations are in various types of machining and welding, and they do offer good pay, family-sustaining wages with authentic career pathways and benefits.
So Jane Addams was founded back in the 80s to try and keep some manufacturing jobs in the area. How have you seen, this neighborhood in particular change in terms of the manufacturing sector?
It's changed quite a bit over the last few decades. We had, back in the late 70s and early 80s, this neighborhood was really bleeding manufacturing jobs, primarily in the metalworking sector. And over the years, we have worked to retain some of those companies, both here in the Ravenswood Industrial Corridor and in the larger metropolitan area. But this community in this neighborhood, the manufacturing that we do here has changed quite a bit. We no longer do a lot of metalworking. We're much more into beverage manufacturing, textiles, light manufacturing, and so that's why you'll hear it called, as today, it's called Malt Row.
Mm-hmm. And have you been able to adapt to make sure that you can sort of meet the needs of those, the newer kinds of manufacturing employers?
Absolutely. So the industry, we're in Industry 4.0. We're on the cusp of Industry 5.0. So we're looking ahead to meet the needs of our employer partners tomorrow in addition to today. So we're really looking at some jobs in robotics and additive manufacturing, some of the new technologies that are emerging so that we can make sure that we're properly training the workforce that we're going to need over the course of the next decade.
So when people think about manufacturing jobs, I imagine a lot of the times they might not have a great perception of what that is, that it's sort of like a dark or dingy kind of work. How do you try to combat that perception and educate them about what the work's like?
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's an image that I think the sector has struggled with over the years, over the last, couple decades. That's definitely not the case anymore. When you're looking at, especially these middle skilled types of positions, they are high-tech positions. They're positions that I think are really attractive for people that want to both work with their hands but also use technology. So they're definitely not the jobs of your father or your grandfather's manufacturing plants.
So we've got about 45 seconds left, but obviously the pandemic has really impacted a lot of kinds of work where you're doing sorts of in-person trainings, things like that. How did COVID-19 affect the work your organization does?
It was a challenge. It certainly was a challenge. We had to pivot and go to virtual training, which, as you can imagine, we're very hands-on. We're very tactile individuals when it comes to our training platform. So that was a challenge, and I think, the digital divide was really exacerbated for the populations that we serve, being that they're primarily low-income, unemployed, and underemployed folks. So that has been certainly a challenge and something that we've been working very intentionally on.
All right. Well, Reagan Brewer-Johnson, Jane Addams Resource Corporation, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's all for us tonight from Ravenswood. Brandis, back to you.
Nick, thank you so much. See you later. And up next, details of a mostly forgotten Frank Lloyd Wright building in an all-new Ask Jeffrey. Today, we know Frank Lloyd Wright as one of the most influential American architects. But early in his career, he designed projects you might have trouble recognizing as his, even if you lived in the building. Jeffrey Baer is here with the story of one such Wright building that once stood on Chicago's South Side in this week's Ask Jeffrey Welcome back to the studio, Jeffrey. Good to have you here in person.
You're not in a little box.
I know. You're actually a whole person.
Socially distanced. You know.
Obviously. Okay, so this question comes from Gwendolyn Washington in Hyde Park. She asks, I grew up in the Francis Apartments in Bronzeville, an early project designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. What can you tell us about the building and its place in Wright's career?
Well, as you alluded to, Brandis, our questioner Gwendolyn, when she was growing up in this building, which is located, or was located, at 43rd Street and Forestville Avenue in what is today Bronzeville, she had no idea it was designed by one of the world's most famous architects. And it's actually easy to see why. It looks nothing like the low-slung geometric prairie style that Wright is known for, nor his other famous buildings like this one, Unity Temple in Oak Park, or here's Falling Water in Pennsylvania. Doesn't look like any of those buildings. And that's because the Francis Apartments, again in Bronzeville, were designed in 1895, which was very early in Wright's career, when his style was still more reminiscent of his one-time boss and mentor, Louis Sullivan. Now, we, of course, know Sullivan, this is Sullivan's work now, for rejecting historical styles and pioneering the aesthetic modern soaring skyscraper with his famous adage, form follows function, instead of pasting on Greek columns and Roman arches to his buildings. Louis Sullivan, Wright's former boss, developed a system of sinuous ornamentation inspired by organic natural forms as well as the building's structure. And so you can really see this play out in Frank Lloyd Wright's Francis Apartments. Let's take a look at the building's entranceway here with its terracotta ornament weaving through the inner courtyard. It's in conversation with the building's gates and other flourishes, and we're actually going to talk about more of that in a minute. And if you look closely at the interconnecting circles and lines, wow, it feels strikingly close to something that Louis Sullivan, his former boss, would have done, say in Louis Sullivan's Carson Peary Scott department store in the Loop, or even in Sullivan's last commission, which was the Krause Music Store, which is still standing in Lincoln Square. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright's four-story Francis apartment building, now gone, was built as middle-income housing with apartments on the upper floors and retail space there along 43rd Street. Over the years, the Francis apartments sadly deteriorated, and as I said, they were eventually torn down, really without much protest or fanfare, and that happened in 1971.
Now, Wright and Sullivan are both titans, we know, of modern architecture, but they had a complicated relationship.
Complicated would be an understatement, I think, Brandis. Wright joined Sullivan's firm, which was called Adler and Sullivan, in 1888, and he worked as a draftsman on one of the firm's most famous projects, the Auditorium Building in downtown Chicago. They would work together for the next 5 years until Wright started moonlighting, designing houses for his own clients to make extra cash. Now, this was a total violation of his contract with Sullivan, and Sullivan furiously fired him, and that led to bad blood between the two that lasted until near the end of Sullivan's life, when eventually they did reconcile. Now, Wright and Sullivan did collaborate on several very influential projects during their professional relationship. These include the notable Charnley Persky House, which still stands in the Gold Coast neighborhood. It's now the home of the Society of Architectural Historians. Sullivan and Adler were the architects of record on that building, that home. But the Society tells us that Wright really oversaw many of the details, likely including these balusters on the second floor, which really feel like a sort of a foreshadowing of Wright's mature style.
And Jeffrey, is there anything left of the Francis Apartments today?
Unfortunately, not much. The site is now home to a series of contemporary townhouses, which is part of a larger wave of construction, new construction in Bronzeville. A few remnants from the building are now housed at the Art Institute, including this gate from the original entranceway, as well as this intricate ventilator grill that Wright designed for the building. But if you really want to see a rare surviving example of Wright's early Sullivan-esque work, You just have to go about 1.5 miles north of the site of the former project we were talking about, and you'll get to the Rollison row houses on Calumet Avenue near 32nd Street. Notice the Sullivan-esque ornamentation on the front. Wright did the remodeling job on these townhomes in 1894, a year before he designed Francis Apartments, and that was just a year after Sullivan booted him out. So sort of right before he was right.
See what you did there.
And yes, and the interiors of the Rollison homes were destroyed by fire in 1981, but the original facades remain, and they are a Chicago landmark.
Always fun, Jeffrey Baer. Good to have you here.
Great
in the
to
flesh.
be here, yes.
Thanks so much, Jeffrey. And don't forget that you can visit our website for more details about the Francis Apartments. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Jeffrey Baer. That's at WTTW.com/AskJeffrey. And we're back to wrap things up, but first, a look at some weekend events. And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Weekend Review. And we leave you tonight with a look at 3 Bennett Wallaby Joeys, not kangaroos, born at the Brookfield Zoo last year. Oh my goodness. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm named on the 2021 expertise list of the best personal injury attorneys in Chicago. This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible